My 60 Years on the Plains, Chapter 7. The Shoshones expected to remain in this camp for several days to give their women an opportunity to finish dressing robes and drying meat. The grass was good, the timber was plentiful, and a few buffalo were on the prairie. To supply the camp with fresh meat and to scout for war parties would keep the young men busy, so Washakie said. In the meantime, the Indians were having a joyous time dancing over Blackfeet's scalps. I passed the time in visiting all the lodges and studying the habits and customs. I was becoming interested and had a desire to learn everything pertaining to Shoshones so that I could ascertain the difference between them and other tribes that I might come in contact with. The scouts kept reporting fresh Indian tracks, but no Indians. This brought about a council between the Shoshones and our party for the purpose of devising some plan to rid this section of war parties. We had more than a passing interest in accomplishing this, not that we feared the war parties, but we wanted to collect furs without being constantly annoyed. Williams was the leading spirit in the council. After much deliberation, it was decided to form 3 parties of 25 each, who should operate in conjunction, some of our party to be in each of the 3. By daylight the following morning, all were ready, and we silently left the village, taking the routes selected. Our company of Shoshones, including Williams, went to Bull Lake, as it was a favorite place for war parties. Indian tradition had it that the father of all buffaloes roamed around this lake. From the high knolls surrounding the water, one could sweep the country for miles with the aid of a spyglass and could readily discover any Indian village or trapping outfit. When we reached Bull Lake Creek, where it forms a junction with Big Wind River, we saw fresh pony tracks coming from the east side of Big Wind River and going up the creek. It was impossible to tell the number as they traveled in single file. Every foot of this section was known to the Shoshones, which was of great advantage. We went up the creek for about 3/4 of a mile when the country became rough. 3 of the young men now dismounted, stripped, and went on ahead to scout, we holding their horses. When we received a signal from the scouts, we would advance to the point explored. It was just about this time that we heard shots from the east side of Wind River, and we felt certain that one of our parties had come in contact with hostiles. Our scouts approached a high timbered knoll and discovered a band of Indians running towards a high ridge, looking in the direction from which we had heard the shots. Our scouts returned on a run and mounted. Moonhavy, a noted chief and warrior, took the lead, keeping under cover so as not to be observed by the Indians on the ridge. We continued on for half a mile and came to a crooked draw, which headed up on the ridge. The chief wheeled and went up this draw for 1/4 of a mile and halted. Just ahead was a sharp bend, which, when passed, would bring us in full view of the Indians on the ridge. The Shoshones stripped to breechcloths in short order and mounted their runners. Moonhavy gave the signal for a charge and dashed around the curve. Within 200 yards were 14 head of ponies under the care of 2 young men. They gave a warning cry to their comrades on the ridge, who fired several shots without effect, as the range was too great. With a furious yell, the Shoshones charged on the 2 men, who tried their best to mount, but they were soon on their way to the happy hunting grounds. The Indians on the ridge, seeing the 2 men fall, disappeared. Our party divided, one going to the right, the other to the left, until about 300 yards apart, when both parties started up the ridge. On reaching the top, we saw the Indians about 1/4 of a mile distant, making for Wind River, where cottonwood groves were visible. Once there, they would be able to stand us off for some time and more than likely kill some of us. The country was comparatively level to the river, with the exception of 2 steep draws, which we crossed at a run. If the war party had used good judgment, they would have taken possession of one of these draws, but their minds must have been set on the timber and the river. The war party next scattered, which was another blunder, as they must have realized that they could not reach the timber and that we outnumbered them 2 to 1. They should have remained together and taken possession of some buffalo wallow, for there were plenty of these around. I failed to see the wonderful strategy with which Indians are credited. I had a quick eye and I observed every move of both parties. When the Indians scattered, they were about 250 yards ahead, and if the scene that followed could have been reproduced on canvas, it would have been worth a fortune. It was a scene that occurs only in actual warfare. The Shoshones gave yell after yell, charging madly and most recklessly. The chief warned them to be careful, but they paid no attention to him, for in a case like this, it is a great feat to take the first scalp, and the successful warrior is greatly praised in their village. His lady love guides the other girls, claiming her lover as the bravest of the brave, first among their enemies. I believe the same rule exists among pale-faced girls when a lover has performed an heroic act. The war party dropped blankets and war sacks, which contained tobacco, pipes, moccasins, and other things, thinking that the Shoshones would stop and pick them up, but the Shoshones charged on, redoubling their yells. It was a wild scene for a few moments, shots and arrows flying in every direction. Williams, Moonhavy, and myself had the fleetest horses and reached the Indians first. Williams killed the first Indian, while Moonhavy and I both fired at the same time, and both missed, which chagrined me greatly. I dashed after a tall Indian who had his arrow strung, passing him at a run. We both fired at the same time, his arrow lodging in the fleshy part of my horse's shoulder, which would have ruined him if the arrow had had force behind it, but the Indian was scared. My shot knocked him down, and I heard Williams yell out, "Well done, boy." There were only 3 left, and they were having a combat with a few young Shoshones who were doing poor execution. Some older men stepped in and put a quietus to any further fighting by sending the 3 to join their companions in the happy hunting grounds. After lifting hair and collecting plunder, we returned to where we had left the captured ponies. 7 of them belonged to the Shoshones, having been stolen by the Blackfeet. 5 of them belonged to Kentucky's party, and there were 2 strange ones, which Moonhavy forced Williams and myself to accept. The shots had ceased from the east, so the chief sent the wounded men to the village, and the rest of us started over towards where we supposed our second party was. We discovered them clustered together near a spring. One Shoshone was dying, having been shot through the lungs, and 3 others were wounded. They had come in contact with 9 Blackfeet who had taken possession of a rocky knoll and made a breastwork on it. The 2 opposing forces exchanged shots for some time without any apparent result. As Fearless Evans remarked, council was held and it was agreed to charge the knoll from 2 sides. 6 Indians were left behind to cover the charge by continuous firing at the breastwork. With a yell and a rush, the knoll was charged and a quietus was put on those 9 Blackfoot in short order. Evans had his cheek split open with an arrow, and Kentuck received a slight wound in the left arm. Williams always carried a supply of court plaster, lint, and bandages for such emergencies, and soon fixed up the men. After dressing the Indians' wounds, we took 2 long poles and fastened one on each side of a gentle pony, lacing a pair of blankets to the poles. On this, we put the dying Indian and set out for the village. The other wounded Indians rode ponies and Fuluk were proud of their wounds. Fool-like were proud of their wounds. We reached the village at 3 o'clock and were met by half the tribe who wanted to ascertain the cause of our slow approach. And now there was a mixture of joy and sorrow blended together. The relatives of the dead man mourning and making the night hideous with dismal howls, others singing, yelling, and sending forth war whoops, parading the village and recounting in detail all the incidents pertaining to the fight and the extermination of those dogs of Blackfeet. End of chapter 7.